Resuming debate, the honourable member for Toronto-Danforth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm privileged to rise in the House today to speak on behalf of my constituents of Toronto-Danforth and all Canadians who are deeply worried by the Conservative government's assault on democracy in the form of this omnibus budget implementation act. Au moins un tiers du projet de loi C-38 concerne l'affaiblissement des protections et des règles environnementales. De plus, ce projet de loi introduit une série de mesures n'ayant jamais été annoncées et qui auront pour résultat de diminuer la transparence et d'augmenter le secret entourant le gouvernement, ce gouvernement. Ces mesures incluent l'éviscération des pouvoirs du vérificateur général. En plus du contenu du projet de loi comme tel, nous nous opposons à sa nature anti-démocratique. Conservatives truly are trying to hide from oversight and avoid accountability with this bill, both in terms of how it's going through the House and its content. It is inappropriate to put so many sweeping changes to so many different areas in a single budget bill. This is just purely inappropriate legislative behavior, Mr. Speaker. Allow me to touch on just some of the areas hammered by Bill C-38, starting with the environment. This week, 10 of the leading environmental organizations in Canada launched a protest campaign to raise awareness of the huge threat the Conservative budget represents to the environment. But they equally wish us all to understand the onslaught against democracy itself represented by this act. Parliamentary democracy is under assault, Mr. Speaker, by the wholesale, regressive transformation of federal environmental law without serious opportunity to debate and scrutinize. And much of the change in the budget bill is transparently intended to cripple the elements of participatory democracy that are part of current environmental law. Now, the campaign of these 10 brave groups is called Blackout, Speak Out, Silence en Parle in French, and it asks Canadians to turn their websites black, to darken their websites on June 4th as a form of collective national protest. Now, why do I say they are brave, Mr. Speaker? Because they know that members of this Conservative government have already attacked them as radical, as extremists, as money launderers. And the budget itself seeks to chill their participation in education and advocacy around the environment by encouraging Revenue Canada to go after their charitable status. They know that they will be targeted by the government and its big oil partners and front groups. In fact, the government has earmarked $8 million at least to help allow the Canada Revenue Agency to go after charities ostensibly engaging in political activity or being funded by so-called foreign sources. In the hands of a government at war with environmental and social justice organizations, this is a frightening new spending initiative, Mr. Speaker. And finally, on the theme of the environment, allow me to mention a matter close to the hearts of the people of Toronto-Danforth. There is no renewal of the eco-energy home retrofits program that was very popular with Toronto residents, including those in my riding, and most importantly, very valuable as a sustainability measure. Now let me pick up on the theme of removing oversight and accountability. The Budget Implementation Act is creating a much more secretive and non-transparent government through removal and closures of oversight powers and bodies. Bill C-38 eliminates the mandatory Auditor General oversight of financial performance and reporting by 12 agencies, no less, by removing provisions that require the Auditor General to audit accounts, financial statements, and financial transactions, and this includes the Canada Revenue Agency, ironically enough. Now, as if this isn't enough, Mr. Speaker, it is also eliminating the position of the Inspector General for the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, which will drastically reduce accountability at CSIS, especially since we know that the Inspector General's recent reports have been critical of CSIS and the government. And I think it's fair to assume that this critical scrutiny is most probably the reason the Inspector General, has been eliminated as an institution. Once again, this shows that the government is dealing another, not just hammer blow, but sledgehammer blow to the core foundations of our democracy. Let me briefly speak to OAS, Old Age Security. I hope to speak later in the day on the private members' bill. I will simply say, what's the obvious? The Conservatives did not campaign on cutting OAS. Davos was the context for the Prime Minister to spring this on us. Now we know that the age of eligibility will rise over time from 65 to 67. And rise over time is the key word, because that has allowed the government to spread the disingenuous message that it's not current seniors that need to worry about this budget, but those coming afterwards who just have to plan their affairs. This is the ultimate in which politics, Mr. Speaker. Seniors who now know they are safe, in the government's terms, however, are amongst the most outraged, and I can attest to that by virtue of the most recent by-election campaign I was part of and talking to people since. They are thinking of those coming after them, unlike this government, and do not buy into the crass assumption that they won't care and that they therefore will vote for the Conservatives because they are shielded from the immediate effects. Housing. Mr. Speaker, the people of Toronto-Danforth are extremely disappointed that there's nothing for affordable nor social housing in the budget bill, and this has been condemned by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which stated, quote, "A healthy housing sector able to meet a broad range of needs is a vital part of the economic and social well-being of any community. Local governments have been implementing an array of initiatives to increase and preserve the supply of rental and affordable housing. Municipalities are always doing their part, but they can't do it alone," unquote. Cities have clearly been left out on housing, on transit, on other fronts. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Mental Health Commission of Canada released its mental health strategy and stated the importance of affordable, secure and safe housing for people living with mental health problems and illnesses, and yet there is nothing in this budget for them. Other important cuts are buried in the bill and or indirectly created by the bill, such as cuts to CBC radio drama. As you know, all drama programming from Radio 1 has been eliminated. I've been receiving many complaints from my constituents. One wrote the following, quote, "Cutting the CBC's budget is detrimental, not only to the Canadian arts community and the listening public, but to political culture in Canada," unquote. I could not agree more. As demonstrated by an article in the Globe on April 12th by Kelly Nestruck, drama programming nurtured numerous playwrights and actors and allowed them to gain national attention while furthering the public's understanding of politics and society. Afghanida, for example, not only, quote, "was the source of employment of an astonishing number of young Canadian playwrights," unquote, but it also was the only drama to further our understanding of the causes and the legacy of the Canadian Forces mission in Afghanistan until the very recent wave of stage plays have finally rolled out. It's a shame that the government is cutting spending on areas like CBC radio drama that have had a long and culturally valuable history of informing, stimulating, and yes, indeed, entertaining Canadians. Pour conclure, Monsieur le Président, clairement les conservateurs ne comprennent pas le lien entre les communautés en santé et la santé de l'économie. Donc, qu'allons-nous faire? Cette multitude de changements passe par le mauvais forum. Ces changements ne devraient pas être cachés de cette manière. Des projets de loi sur le budget qui ressemblent à un cheval de Troie ne devraient pas devenir la normale. Si ce gouvernement n'a pas peur de rendre des comptes, il devrait accepter de travailler avec nous afin de diviser ce projet de loi en multiples projets de loi. Unfortunately, it appears the government has already rejected that possibility of splitting this bill into more manageable tranches for the Parliament to study. I hope there is still time for them to reconsider. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable député de Longueuil-Boucher.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais féliciter mon collègue pour son très bon discours sur ce sujet et comme son arrivée, somme toute, récente en Chambre, j'aimerais lui demander si il est déçu de la démocratie telle qu'on la pratique au Canada actuellement.
The honourable member for Toronto-Danforth.
I thank my colleague, the honourable member from Longueuil, for the question. I think I will hold off in my judgment for just a little bit longer. I must say that I do feel like we are on the cusp of perhaps the most anti-democratic era in the history of this country. There are too many signs for us to ignore, and if we keep ignoring them, we will be in deep trouble.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Halifax West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I congratulate my colleague on his speech, and I'd like to ask him his thoughts, in particular on the proposed changes to the OAS, where the government has talked about this supposed crisis, where the OAS, they claim, is going to be unaffordable, and yet they can't really point to any expert opinion that says that. Their own government reports say it's not going to be any jeopardy. There's no issue really in terms of affordability. The OECD says no issue of affordability, and yet we're going to take people who are perhaps poor, because we know that 40% of the people who receive OAS receive $20,000 in income or less each year. They're going to make them wait 2 more years, which would cost them as much as $30,000 and cost them real hardship as they are waiting to receive this assistance. I'd like my honourable colleagues' comments on this decision by the government.
The honourable member for Toronto-Danforth.
Thank you to the member for Halifax West, who did a good job in setting out some fundamental premises with which I agree. I think it's very important to know that indeed the Parliamentary Budget Officer has shown that it's not necessary to do what the government is planning to do, that OAS is sustainable, but quite apart from whether or not for a certain period of time, of 30 to 40 years, a certain percentage of the gross domestic product will have to be added to what is needed for OAS. The whole question is one of choices. We organize ourselves around that need. We know it's coming. We organize ourselves around. We don't treat this as a permanent crisis. It's also just a little bit disappointing to have heard in the House today in question period that one of the approaches the Conservative minister has been taking is to reassure seniors now that they're not affected and emphasize how important OAS is to them. So basically, they're saying that those 10 years from now, it's going to be equally important, yet we're going after you. I don't think that's acceptable, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. A short question, the honourable member for Churchill.
Yeah, my question is to my honourable colleague from Toronto-Danforth, who I'm thrilled is with us in the House. I had the opportunity to visit his constituency along with him, and I met a lot of young people that are very concerned about their future, and I was wondering if he could comment about on how disastrous this budget is when it comes to Canada's young people.
The honourable member for Toronto-Danforth.
Well, I think it's fair to say that youth are ignored as a specific concern in the budget. The government has taken care to say their overall motivation is to stimulate prosperity, even as they're predicting loss of jobs as part of the budget. So hopefully, if they're correct, and we all hope that they are correct, we're going to see some jobs out of this. But that's really not what youth expect right now. There's a great degree of worry and alienation amongst the youth I've spoken to, and I have to say that the environmental provisions of this bill are probably bothering the youth in my riding as much as anything. They believe, they understand they're ahead of the curve, they're ahead of the rest of us on the environment, and they are deeply, deeply disappointed about this part of the budget. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Brant.